Page 12. The earthly human race has entered into a stage of a witnessing of an immense cosmic upheaval, into a new age which is becoming apparent ever clearer and more obvious before the seeing eyes of thinking human beings. But nonetheless, the majority of this humankind lies in the abyss of the unknowledgeness and consciousness enslavement. So it has become necessary to get to the bottom of the causes of their decline and present this to them in a message. At the same time, however, it is also necessary to point out new ways which lead into a future of spiritual understanding and of consciousness, as well as spiritual harmony. May the earth human beings therefore open their eyes and ears, tear their enslaved thoughts from all irrational teachings, untruths, and from all terrible things. May they open their consciousness senses to the recognition of the truth. May he or she look up into the endlessness of space, wherein the stars reign in majestic stillness and sublimity. In creational regulation, they follow their course through thousands and millions of years in harmony with the all-valid laws of the creation and in fulfillment of the recommendations to be followed. On all these stars, creational laws and recommendations, eternal workings, and becoming and timeless being and passing in the endless, coming into being, prevail. And may the human beings look down on their earth, for also there the same laws and recommendations of the creation fulfill themselves in brazen regulation. The human being, the earth, and all its manifold life forms are integrated into these laws and recommendations as a tiny but important link in the chain of creational creation. Where the nature lives in its creationally given laws and recommendations, and fulfills its existence untouched by human hand, there reigns beauty, dignity, power, and greatness. But there, where traces of human interference, deliberate unlogical regulation, and corrections are visible, there all beauty, dignity, power, greatness, and regulation vanish. So the nature unwillingly becomes witness to the irrationality and the unintellect of the human beings, who still so gladly call themselves the crown of the creation. They live in this delusion, and are not conscious that they have only put on a crown that is too big for them, which they are not able to carry, and which threatens to crush them under its weight. Truly, the earth human beings have developed magnificently far up to the present time, and have brought themselves to the edge of a deep abyss, and before the fangs of the beast, of insanity, driven by irrational teachings and cults of the most evil Ausartungen, which brought forth hatred, vice, greed, lust, affliction, and spilling of blood. Ausartungen means a very bad getting out of the control of the good human nature. And they, the earth human beings, the quote, crown of the creation, they who rule the world have conquered water, air, and fire. They have long ago already forgotten to be a true human being, and to live according to spiritual forms. Thereby they have also fundamentally forgotten to live amongst human beings as a valuable human being in the community. All their forms strive for purely material things, and evilly disregard all things of the spiritual. Since time immemorial, they only wanted to gain might, and if they possessed it, then they used it only for enslavement and subjugation. Fight was their battle cry, and the manifestation of hell was their victory. Through evil and consciousness-enslaving irrational teachings, they created coercion and hypocrisy, spoke of honor and freedom through them, and thereby meant only consciousness enslavement, advantage-taking, and exploitation in every respect, and absolute dependency. For a long time the earth human beings have forgotten to show their true face, because they have buried and lost this within themselves with the beginning of the cultish, irrational teachings. So they only wear a colorful mask, which, however, looks bland, monotonous, and indifferently stoic, and alike in masses. Many human beings have become beasts or, quote, spiritless robots of cultish, irrational teachings. Quote, spiritless in wisdom-based form, They spend their entire earthly days, months, and years unknowing in the most minimal forms of spiritual truth, only in the reflecting and striving for might, greed, materialism, and hatred against their fellow human beings and themselves, malicious and unhonest. They regulated and organized all things of the world by their intellect and by their rationality, through which they made everything subject to them, and only this subservience applied to all their striving and senses. The semblance was more important to them than the truth of the being. The eternal truth of the spirit and the creation was lost to them in the basic elements, and already early on they clung to the unreal teachings of religions. Their enslaving irrational teachings stood closer to them in their self-deception and higher than all the laws and recommendations of the creation in all its truth and wisdom. Out of their extremely miserable, religiously erring view of life, they believed that through the violation of the two creational laws and recommendations, and through the issuing of human law determinations, the humankind would improve in the consonance with unreal religions, or lead to a better future with better life possibilities. Because they have lost the knowledge about the ways of the creation in the human being, they wanted to force the human being to live by material means and religious irrational teachings. For these reasons, they bewitched the masses of the humankind with false promises and equally false ideals and idols in connection with religious irrational teachings, and very soon this way led into enslavement, consciousness-based unfreedom, exploitation, hatred, and greed, and vice to the worst extent. Where there was still a remnant of trust, it quickly and unstoppably turned into evil mistrust and into deadly hatred. And more the earth human beings distanced themselves from the true life, from the spiritual determination of creational origin. The knowledge of the oldest truth and wisdom was lost to them, that the human being is the measure of all creational things, in creation of their own relative absolute fulfillment of the creation within themselves. Now, however, the change of the time, and the course of a new cosmic age with an urgent demand, calls forth the need for the earth human being to developmentally change back in their senses and thinking, and to turn again to the creational spiritual truth, to the actual values of the spiritual life. Up to now, only a vanishing small part of the earth humankind has known or suspected that the human life form not only populates the earthly realm, but that it lives in all the endless expanses of the universe, of this universe. And likewise, only a vanishing small part of all these human beings know that their spirit extends into the spheres of the creational, which cannot be perceived with the material senses. The creation itself, however, is the actual home of every spirit form. It lies in the interest of the individual human being to strive for and to attain a spiritual expansion and deepening, and to revise his or her previous view of life, a view of life that proceeded in purely materialistic and unreal belief paths, and thereby drove the truth of the spirit into evil damnation. Turning back, however, will not be easy, for the way is overgrown with tendrils and thorns. In the most decisive truths, often exactly opposite paths must be trodden, because the human being must learn that through the existence of his or her creational spirit, he or she possesses an immortal part for all duration, a spirit which works together with the creational and does not play a servile role, as this is explained in religions. Every human being must provide the proof to him or herself that his or her spirit works in creational function, and must find relative absolute fulfillment in itself in order to guarantee the absolutely full development in the creation itself. Those human beings, however, who attain this cognition, for them an unavoidable obligation grows from this, to put their own material life into the background, and to lead their spiritual existence to the great viewpoint of the creation, which, in its unstoppable developmental change, holds the endless duration. A human being of the truth knows no prejudices, because a preconceived opinion hinders the searching and finding and the honesty. The human being of truth knows very precisely that all truth and wisdom lie in the timeless flow of the endless duration, so no preconceived opinion finds the entitlement in the existence. Only facts of the truth can be facts of the wisdom, but not anything else which is arranged below it. This is a law, in the great course of all occurrences, for every existence must complete itself in the circle. Cause and effect find their validity in all areas when they are arranged according to laws and recommendations. A preconceived opinion harbors within itself all unlogic of the doubt and untruth. And as a human being therefore approaches it and takes in these transmissions, then he or she may obtain clarity about an evil human weakness, namely, whether he or she is beyond the state of preconceived doubts and criticism, or whether prejudices are still able to dominate him or her. If he or she, however, is still befallen by preconceived opinions, then it is better for them if they set aside this message and leave it to those who are able to search for the truth, free of prejudice. Everywhere in the universe, many different life forms reveal themselves, and all of them are based on a very distinct law. It is that great and invisible activity of the creation which, as an unsolvable mystery, effectuates the endless duration and the endless developmental change. Everything which breathes life in the universe is spatially and temporally bound by this inextricable and mysterious law, except for the spiritual forms which find their existence in the same law and are not subject to temporal or spatial limitations. The spiritual form, however, is creational from the creation, so the law of the passing does not affect it in the being. Also, everything which lives on your earth is subject to the temporal and the spatial, and thus also to the law of the temporal and spatial existence. This is a binding of the material, spatial, and temporal circumstances which, in their existence, represent a regularity of brazen regulation, the developmental change of space and time in material form, the coming into being and passing of the coarse, substantial material. The cognition of all bygone facts of the past in relation to earthly humankind teaches that in their most ancient past, in which the earth human being still lived in the consonance with and in the following of the creational laws and recommendations, their spiritual aspects and the forms of thinking were fully and entirely in accordance with the given natural laws, and thus happiness, knowledge, wisdom, peace, freedom, and love, as well as repose and satisfaction, belonged to the brazen regulation. By the estranging of themselves from the truth of the creation and its laws and recommendations through irrational teachings which got very badly out of control of the good human nature, into religions, however, malicious things were cultivated and overbred, as, for example, hatred, unpeace, slavery, spilling of blood, envy, greed, egoism, strife, and many other spirit-unworthy manifestations. In this regard, it is now necessary to analyze and to show these underlying and destructive, negatively, very badly out of control of the good human nature powers anchored in the human beings, in order to then reveal the way of the truth and freedom and the wisdom, which shall lead them out of their consciousness-based desolation. This way, however, can only be outlined if at the same time the sense of the life is disclosed, and the actual sense of why the human being lives in his or her form altogether. Means primal or ancient. Very many great spiritual human beings have, in the course of the past tens of thousands of years, wandered over your earth, and have endeavored for the answer to the how, where, and why of these great questions. Their endeavors were useless, however, and their body of thoughts handed down to the present time are still trampled to unfruitfulness today, as they have been from time immemorial. Many of these teachings and instructions were knowingly or unknowingly falsified and converted into unreal religious dogmas, and thereby changed to the point of unrecognizability. Immortal truths were thus disregarded or falsified, only because they were very uncomfortable for the human beings and their following, for which he or she had to accept the evil consequences up to the present time. The bringer and proponents of the truth, however, the true prophets, they were trampled underfoot and cursed, deprived of their lives and shamed. Still, the time of such occurrences on your earth is not over. Many wise ones of the new time and truth-bringers will likewise still have to suffer and endure similar things, because the masses of the earth, human beings, delusionally led by religions, will carry out their belief delusion maliciously on them. But the developmental change of the time and the new cosmic age, with all its truths breaking through, will be helpful to them in their struggle and will bring forth the victory to them. The present human race of the earth lives in evil effusiveness of material lusts and pleasures. Their sense of an unburdened life rests solely in a material world, in which the good clothing, a lofty home, best food and drinks, good financial success and profits, and quenching of lusts and vices play the most decisive roles. In their erroneous, unspiritual form of thinking, this is referred to by the human being as a, quote, satisfied earthly existence, naturally in absence of the knowledge about the truth. The earthly human striving of the great masses of humankind goes without exception to the point of bringing, often as quickly and effortlessly as possible, unmeasurable material riches into their possession, and gaining might over others. The standing of material wealth and the social and professional position in the world determine the value of a human being, whereby his or her spiritual values, which are, after all, in truth the only values, are completely disregarded, ridiculed, trampled underfoot, and designated as dumb. In the present time, the reputation of the human being is only judged according to his or her financial standing and according to his or her rank and title. This human being's peaceful and carefree retirement then means for them the fulfillment of their last longings, in which case they are still proud of the, quote, heights of their achieved culture. The pride of the earth humankind in its attained cultural height correlates to most minimal values of material achievements, in which case, however, all values of a cultural kind are denied to them when the spiritual evolution is taken into account. Also, the life which has been stripped of the noble humanhood finds no entitlement at all anymore in reference to any cultural nomination. Crassest egoism is the strongest driving power of all human thinking, doing, and acting, and this species is too cowardly to become conscious of these facts and to admit these even only to themselves in secret. And because courage for the truth is lacking in the earth human beings, and because they live in depraved hypocrisy and a sense estranged wise, there is no longer any understanding amongst you. Every human being lives encapsulated for themselves alone, deceiving and condemning themselves and begrudging the breathing air of those next to them. What use are all the great inventions and discoveries to the earth human being, when through them the true sense of the life is more and more destroyed and eliminated, and the still remaining minimal spiritual values at hand are ultimately lost? What is the use of the research and findings of the academic world, when the consciousness thereby falls into evil enslavement, and the human beings force themselves, through their material inventions and achievements, to the megalomania that they begin to live in the assumption that they are the creation itself? But already since time immemorial, those who possess money and scientists have been leading rulers of the earth, just as it was also the case in Ur times with the ancestors of the earth humankind. Their knowledge took on tremendous forms, so it had to be divided into special fields of expertise. But all their knowledge, research, inventions, and discoveries got very badly out of control of the good human nature into purely worldly and material things, through which every consciousness-based further development was inhibited and suppressed and driven into slavery. Having become unknowing of the spiritual truth, the consciousness-based damnation was cultivated in the truest sense. of the word, the effects of which the humankind of your earth has to suffer up to the present time, and still furthermore. Still, the fall into the bottomless abyss has not been brought to a standstill, because only now are the decisive steps being taken in order to slow down the fall in its enormous speed. These attempts, however, are again and again affected and condemned to failure by the effects and influences inevitably associated with the transition period of the New Age. Confusingly, many new religious cults interfere with the advancement of the breakthrough of the truth in the new time. For, as ever before, the human being is subject to delusional influences at the onset of new times and developmental changes, which have arisen through religious irrational teachings and are driven high, especially at such times. Religious irrational teachings and knowledge from scientific and other worlds of academics carried, in unspeakable forms and factors, germs of deadly and devastating destruction within themselves. This was neither recognized by the academic world nor by the normal earth human being. By all people it was deliberately, consciously, or unconsciously overlooked that everything in the human life also still has a fully unmaterial level, which can neither be reconciled with material scientific facts nor with religious dogmas, and finds its echo in the moral sphere. Neither the intellectual sciences nor the religious dogmas and fantasy interpretations are in a position to free up spiritual, moral, and consciousness-based moral powers from their doings and deeds, which guarantee a spiritual and consciousness-based evolution. Quite the contrary, they deceive those human beings who accept these assumptions into the irrational beliefs of this material and make them dependent on them. Inevitably, these human beings, misguided in this manner, must become material thinking forms who can no longer tear loose from their irrational beliefs at any cost, and therefore often deprive truth proclaimers of their life. This, however, is not only a very evil characteristic of the present time and the future, but it was also in the past. For thousands of years, the earth human beings have lived according to these imperiously created dogmas, and it is no coincidence that especially the most evil and most greedy for might amongst them always took hold of the positions of people's leaders and religious leaders, as well as of guardians of the regulations and morals. It was, and it is also still today, thanks to them, that those who wrestle and struggle for deeper spiritual cognitions, and thus also ethical morals, as well as consciousness-based cognitions and teachings, were and are dismissed, persecuted, murdered, and bloodthirstily slaughtered as heretics, quote, unworldly fantasists, as revolutionists and rebels. Wherever the human being looked and looks in the present time, he or she finds only spilling of blood, hatred, aberration, slavery, deception, mistrust, and confusion, unlogic, untruth, and irrational teachings. Everywhere the same malicious picture is offered to those who, with open eyes and open consciousness sense, are able to see and to recognize the things in their truth. Mistrust and hatred, egoism, and religious irrational teachings have deceived and blinded the people of the earth for thousands of years, such that the entire humankind has become confused and disunited within itself, and is now hurrying at frantic speed into the abyss of its own ruin. In the present time, the mass of the evil and things which have gotten very badly out of control of the good human nature has been reached, that a deadly, blind, destructive rage has torn the humankind into its clutches and brings death, ruin, and destruction over the earthly world. Already for hundreds of years, the foundation stone was laid for this, in which case, however, this also originally dates back to as early as the past thousands of years and finds its origination there. Just as at that time, the greatest destroyers and tyrants still today think themselves to be the heroes and right hand of an imaginary god, who is said to have set them over the peoples as an avenging and regulative ruler, in which case the people who are dependent on them in each case honor and praise them, with or against their own will, as heroes. A oneness is only then able to remain such when it is not split, when no splitting is caused. When a oneness is divided, then it no longer forms a whole, and the loss of the relative absolutely full development is lost. This is the law of all existence, and it is the law of the life. Through this law, all evolution and the certainty is guaranteed, proceeding from brazen creational regulation. This law also has its validity for the earth human being, whose oneness in living together in the whole mass of the humankind and as individuals form the concord. This concord, however, has been lost to the human being, and discord runs through their whole life, discord within themselves, discord in their forms of thinking, discord in their deeds, discord with the ones next to them, and discord with the whole environment. But that is still not enough, because this human discord is also to be found in all things, all those things which embody natural and creational laws, and in the creation itself. Truly, even before the glistening almightiness of the creation, the earth human being does not stop with their discord. Discord is one of the worst measures of the incomplete. Uncompleteness, however, brings all that is destructive and deadly. Therefore, as long as the human being is dominated by the spell of the uncompleteness, he or she must also accept and bear all the consequences of the unfairness, of affliction and misery, of illness, discord, strife and hatred, death and ruin, as a self-created, inevitable consequence. They pulsate through his or her life, arising from his or her all-embracing, conflicting nature and splitting of the oneness. Indeed, many of the earth human beings know this, because they have to suffer everything on their own body, but they do not know the way of the developmental change to the goodness. Their striving may well lie in the getting out of this destructive state, but the knowledge of how to find their way out remains a secret to them. Their wish and compulsion for a better life and for spiritual fulfillment is understandable, but also at the same time, the incomprehensibility begins here. Many truth proclaimers have wandered over the earth and have proclaimed the truth and wisdom of the creational regulation. They have spoken in love and rebuked with harsh words their tongues, mastered many languages, and they proclaimed the truth, the knowledge, and the wisdom amongst all the peoples of the earth. The human being, however, disregarded them, persecuted and killed them, and thereby mocked the strength of the character and of all virtues of the creation. The prophets brought the truth and wisdom of the creation, its laws and recommendations, and its all-embracing love, but they were trampled underfoot and cursed by the human beings. The earth human being did not tear themselves loose from the unreal teachings of their religions, to which they had fallen prey already since early times, and cursed the truth and wisdom of the spiritual teaching. Empty and false promises of religious forms became more important to them than the truth of the creation. For this reason they cursed the creational laws and recommendations and the prophets, trampled, killed, and eliminated them, and thus cleared the way all the more for a complete consciousness-based enslavement through the irrational teachings of their religions which already dominate them. Many attempts have been undertaken to bring the truth and wisdom to the earth human beings, and thereby to offer them a life of the knowledge about the creation, in order to show them the way to the creation and its laws and recommendations. All attempts remained unsuccessful, however, and without exception, the ships of the truth ran aground and sank into the bottomless depths of the unintellect, of the earthly Wesenheiten. The human beings who are searching for the truth have never grasped the root of the terrible things, so they were never able to find cognitions. They were not able to grasp the root of the terrible things because they were bearers of a superficial and false sense of the life, and lost their actual purpose because they replaced the whirling sources of the endless being with the unreal religious dogmas, and ended in the insanity. What is timeless? That is eternal, and in the timeless eternity rest truth and wisdom of creational power and almightiness. The closer the human being comes to this truth and works him or herself towards it, the easier it is for him or her to follow the laws and recommendations in creational regulation. Where the human being acknowledges and follows the truth of the creation and its recommendations and laws, there shines brightly the regulation of all endless duration in his or her life. Repose, peace, and love become the companions of the life through space and time, and testify to the absolutely full development of creational harmony.